Monster Crown is a monster taming RPG inspired by the Game Boy Color era of monster taming games like old school Pokemon and Dragon Warrior monsters. Throughout this video, we will be dissecting the game under a critical lens by analyzing three major aspects that I believe are most important to fans of the monster taming genre. These being the game's story and lore, how the game itself plays, this includes progression, mechanics and features, and finally, the monsters themselves. All that said, this is my second review of the game, whereas I released one about a year ago upon its early access on Steam, so I'll try to avoid being too redundant, but you may see some similarities between the two videos, so just keep that in mind. Monster Crown is in a very different state than it was in early access though, so there's also that. Also, I'm going to avoid any major spoilers, but there will be some mild ones, so definitely keep that in mind. Anyways, let's dive in. Alright, so one of the first things you may or may not notice about Monster Crown is the way in which the story is told and how the player interacts with the world around them. Monster Crown isn't this happy-go-lucky world where humans and their monsters just want to be buddies and fight to be the very best and all that jazz. This is a world of war, corruption, and death, and you'll find yourself bumping heads with those who want to perpetuate that. Right from the get-go, you're introduced to the relationship of man and monster being something that's created through two individuals having similar objectives rather than the power of friendship. Monsters and tamers alike will do what benefits them, and through this mutual understanding of one another, packs were created which allow for these bonds to exist. For me, I found the story behind Monster Crown extremely interesting, especially the lore surrounding the past of Crown Island, aka the place where you're situated, and what's alluded to via the actual environment. Now, this is walking the line of what's considered spoiler territory, but let's just say that there's a certain landmass that doesn't really tell you much of what it is or why it exists, but you get somewhat of an idea of what's going on there or what has gone on there based on the environment itself. We will touch on this a little bit later on in the review, but the game has no shortage of this type of environmental storytelling. Anyways, your story starts as a 14-year-old child living with their parents on a farm who, through some very strange means, ends up being one of the youngest monster tamers. You're told by your father to go deliver a pearl to the king, which essentially propels your journey. On your way there, you'll meet friends and foes and ultimately decide to try to save Crown Island from its impending doom at the hands of Beth, a power-hungry tyrant bent on total domination. Now, when it comes to the characters themselves, I think a really good cast of major characters was set up, although I do wish that we got a little more for each of the characters' arcs. Again, without too much spoilers, I would have liked to understand more of Beth's reasoning behind her philosophy, more about the old kings and what exactly transpired in the times before the player character was born, and other characters whom I don't want to get into too much, but I feel like a lot of the characters only give you a glimpse of who they are, and I do really feel like there's a little missing to each of them. This could be intentional as well, as the game does seem to have the same sort of style of storytelling that a game like Sekiro would have, where you're given what you're needed during the actual campaign itself, but a lot of the other stuff is left to interpretation. That said, for me, I found the core characters interesting enough to want more, so I definitely think that the game does a pretty good job with keeping these characters interesting. We're going to talk about this a little more when we get into how progression works, but I will say that the story does move along very fast, and I definitely would have liked to see more of and get a better insight to both the thugs and gangsters present within the game as well. So all that said, I did really enjoy the game's story, but I would have really liked some of the deeper implications being expanded upon a little bit. Over to the gameplay, the game features a wide variety of features and mechanics that definitely set it apart from other monster taming games. First of all, the game features single battles where the trainer can have up to 8 monsters, but has a mechanic called Synergy, which really mix up how the battles work. The player can choose to raise up their synergy by either switching or commanding their monster to block, which will give them various buffs and eventually lead to a transformation, not much unlike Mega Evolution from Pokemon. On top of this, the game also features a variety of transformation items that can either be used during battle at no cost of the item itself to temporarily transform the monster in question, or they can choose to consume the item to completely and permanently transform their monster. Each of these even has their own lore implications, like the atomic clock aging your monster by 1,000 years. The game, of course, has crossbreeding mechanics as well, which allow for 1,200 plus monsters to exist, which is absolutely nuts and really only the surface. The breeding system is one of, if not the most intricate I've seen so far out of any of the fully released monster taming games, allowing you to completely customize which stats are passed down, making each monster truly unique, even if two monsters share the same body type and palette. Via breeding, monsters will pass down their stats, their color, their typing, their growth rate, and all in all, if you're looking for a more complex take on breeding, this is definitely the game you'll want to check out. It doesn't just end here, however, because the game has a lot of other mechanics that you don't necessarily have to utilize, but you totally can, like bumping into wild eggs, which are essentially hybrid monsters that exist in the world for you to obtain, brilliant monsters, which are basically Monster Crown's version of a shiny, but instead of being an alternate color palette, they act as a wild card, essentially allowing you to breed into any random palette, and they themselves flash vigorously on screen. Oh, did I mention that the game has overworld encounters, which is definitely awesome, so no more running around in caves getting into battles every 5 steps either. There's also the scouting mechanic that allows you to gain experience and defeat monsters outside of combat. True fusion, which is similar yet different to crossbreeding. I could make a whole video about that as well, and I might just do that. And there's just a whole lot more. I could literally go on for days about how many different features are within this game, so expect dedicated videos on some of these. In terms of progression, the game is semi-open world, allowing for the player to explore high-level areas, which is nice, but also has a level cap based on your progression, which can be increased through high-stake battles. I do think that some points in the game definitely have a real big power creep, like the mini-boss found in this cave who's like level 38 while everyone else in your team is quite under-leveled, as are the enemies in comparison, but overall the game isn't overly difficult by any means. Even the final battle, which I won't show because I don't want to spoil it, can be defeated by lower level monsters if you utilize strategy correct. One thing I also like is that there are 2 potential ways the game can end based on a decision you make near the end of the game, and one of them is pretty epic whilst the other is very heartfelt, which I definitely appreciate. After you do beat the game, there's also an entire region to explore, and I really can't say much about that either because I don't want to spoil it for you guys, but it's a lot of fun. And yeah, the game has 2 regions. Now, there are some issues with the game, and I'm personally playing on Steam, so with future Xbox and PS4 users and Nintendo Switch users, you may have a different experience than me, but the game does have a pretty significant amount of bugs, most of which are either insignificant or mildly inconvenient, but some of them are serious and can cause soft locking. This is why if you do get the game, I'd suggest saving very often, because this unfortunately is a reality, though Jason has been hard at work trying to patch some of these issues out. I wouldn't by any means go as far as to say not to get the game or anything like that, but I do think that you should be aware of these types of bugs and the fact that they exist because they can disrupt your experience on varying degrees. Now, finally, we're going to talk a little bit about the monsters, and I've said pretty much my piece about them in the last review when I was talking about early access, but I really like these designs, and the Game Boy Color-inspired aesthetic really enhances it for me as well. The monsters in Monster Crown aren't your friends. They're not these cuddly little animals. These are beasts that want to kill you if it benefits them. Some of these things look absolutely menacing, whilst others look really alien, and this is something I wish more monster taming games would do. Each and every one of the crossbreed forms are also hand-drawn and not created by an algorithm, which I think adds quality to some of these designs as well. Now that said, pixel art, and especially the sort of GBC-inspired pixel art, is not everybody's cup of tea, and I totally get that, but if you are someone who loves this type of aesthetic, you're really gonna love Monster Crown's monsters. At least I do. So yeah, guys, like I said before, this is my second time around reviewing the game, so I don't want to sit and focus too much on all of the aspects of the game that I've already covered, but all in all, Monster Crown is a fun experience, and much like my early access review, I personally think it's worth buying, but you will have to deal with some bugs. And though it is buggier than I would have liked, it's ultimately extremely enjoyable, and I can understand why the game does have a lot more bugs than a more simpler title, just because of the vast array of mechanics that have been implemented into the game. Monster Crown is a fun and daring title that I truly enjoyed playing in spite of the aforementioned shortcomings. The game really takes complexity to a whole new level, and I think it's a definite must-play for someone looking for a more complex and mature monster taming experience. But yeah, guys, I'm curious to know your thoughts on Monster Crown. If you have played it or you've just seen the trailers and this review, what do you like and dislike about Monster Crown so far, and what would you like to see for any future Studio RM titles that come into fruition? Leave your thoughts down below in the comments, and if you did enjoy this video, definitely make sure to like and subscribe. We're getting really close to that 20,000 subscriber mark, so it would definitely be appreciated. You can also check me out on Twitter at GymLeaderEd and our subscriber Discord as well. Special thanks to the channel's patrons, especially StealCase and Jim Hamilton, our mythical tier backers. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Peace.